Hi everyone. Tonight we're going to talk about AT consideration. This is the week 3 lecture. The roadmap for tonight, we are going to review the Practical Fun Guide, chapters 1, 2, and 3. We're also going to review the Connecticut AT guidelines as it specifically relates to AT consideration. And we're also going to talk a little bit about your visual support for AT consideration that's due after listening to this lecture. Please remember to have some notebook or either have your blog out so that you can kind of follow along and jot down some notes as we go through the lecture. Remember, these are just notes, so you don't have to do anything formal. Just respond to some of the questions that I ask you and then post it up on Blackboard 9. Alrighty, here we go. So now let's go on to the Practical and Fun Guide. Your assignment was to read through, look at the introduction, chapters 1, 2, and 3. So looking specifically at the introduction now, what I want you to do in your blog is just jot down, did you have any new information or anything really surprising that came through? The authors, Christopher and Sally, definitely have a different perspective on assistive technology and a different perspective on writing textbooks. So I'd love to get your viewpoint on, how it is reading this book and kind of your perspective on that. What I really love is in the introduction, they give you kind of the rules about assistive technology and all specifically rules for their book. What I really like is they put the emphasis on being learners for life. And with assistive technology, that's definitely a motto that you have to keep because the field continually changes. Anything that you consistently used and that was updated and cutting edge, by tomorrow there might be a new update or a new template or even a new product that is even better than the one that you were using. And that perspective is really important if you want to stay relevant in the field. Another one that I really like is talking about how we're pioneers, taking chances, and that's the last one on their don't column. And I think that's really important to be able to take risks, especially in AT, because we'll be looking at technology that maybe you're not familiar with or a concept that you're uncomfortable with. And being willing to take risks and put yourself out there is extremely important because that's exactly what our students are doing when they're trying out assistive technology. It's something new, might be something unfamiliar. So if we model that risk-taking for students and for teachers, it's a really important thing to have us be able to do, especially when you're looking at implementing assistive technology and helping in that issue. Now on to chapter 1. I'm sure a lot of this was definitely review for you, especially looking at definitions, laws, and how to interpret them. But Sally and Christopher's writing style really comes out immediately, looking at their twist on Dr. Seuss with the no tech, low tech, mid tech, and high tech. And things like this are really helpful to try and break the ice if you're doing an assistive technology training or doing a professional development. A lot of their little stories or poems are really helpful to kind of just help and set the mood and get people ready to have a training. So I want you to just kind of take these into consideration as you're reading and make some notes of which ones that you find really helpful for you, especially if you're going to be responsible for training teachers. That's definitely important. So as you see on your slide, I just want to talk a little bit about their perspective of the meaning of any and accessible. They definitely take a totally different perspective on this that is really introduced for me when I first read this book for the first time, really thinking about it this way. Anything can be called assistive technology, and that's what they talk about really on page 14 and 15. And that's something to really impress on your administrators and your teachers, and really just helping set the precedent that it's not just high technology, it's not just the computer, it really can be anything from rulers, protractors, Velcro, anything that helps a child maintain, increase, or improve the functional capabilities. But what I thought really changed my perspective is their meaning of accessible. And they talk about a little bit about the accommodation preferential seating. And I think we see that a lot on our IEPs, and taking that as the perspective of how it might be considered assistive technology, I think is really important. So what I want you to do now is just kind of jot down in your blog, how has your perspective changed after reading that portion of the chapter, especially when you're looking at considering assistive technology. And this particular part is going to play into your activity that's due after this portion. At the end of chapter 2, they discuss the following questions if you're looking at a specific task like putting up a picture. And they ask I think there's a series of more than 10 questions about putting up a picture. And I put in this cartoon because it's one of my favorites, just looking at comparing high-tech and low-tech. And I feel like you'll probably see this a lot in your schools where we almost try and reinvent the wheel or create something in a high-tech sense that really might be much easier looking at low technology. I find that a lot with sometimes flashcards. I'll have a referral and a teacher will look at all different apps to make the flashcards when it really just might be the easiest thing for the child to do is create them on their own, just using index cards, a paper, and a pencil. And I just think that this cartoon is one of the perfect illustrations of that. When we look at the high-tech solution, it might not be the best, and it might create more obstacles than really solving the problems that we're looking at addressing. On to chapter 2. This chapter starts off with clearing up some popular misconceptions. What I would like you to do in your blog is write about any perspective that has changed for you. Did you have any of these notions about assistive technology that maybe might have been changed, or your perspective has changed at the end of this chapter? So just write that down for me, jot it down in your blog about any misconception that you might have had and how it has changed. Next, what the authors do is they talk about how increasing a student's independence is not the goal of assistive technology, rather it's a byproduct. And they give a little example of using Judy as an example and showing how assistive technology helps to accomplish her goal, but it might necessarily create independence immediately. Independence just becomes a byproduct. And they use that specifically looking at communication. Judy will make requests, and then it talks about how initially starting off her device, she might need some more prompting. And that's a really important aspect of assistive technology to make sure that you convey to teams. When I'm doing an evaluation and I first introduce word prediction, and if I create a chart in my AT evaluation, typically the child's words per minute will drastically decrease when they're using word prediction because it's a brand new skill. The student isn't used to looking at choices on their screen and then continuing to type on the keyboard and possibly transferring their hand over to the mouse. There's a lot of different skills that go into using word prediction appropriately. So initially, when you're looking at implementing word prediction, a child's work output, written output, might actually decrease during the learning curve of learning to use the software, and they might actually need more support and more prompting initially to get over that hump. So even though assistive technology might increase independence as a byproduct, it's not the sole goal. You're really looking at assistive technology supporting a goal and objective and helping that child master that goal and objective. So if you're using word prediction to increase the quality of writing for a child, then absolutely you'll probably get better vocabulary if the child's spelling was holding them back, but you might not increase that independence initially because they still need support using the actual product. Lastly, I want to talk a little bit about Tyler, who is the case study where the authors were talking a little bit about restricting students in regards to technology. This is on page 25. They talk about how Tyler is a mad clicker, and the teachers asked the AT specialist to create a modified mouse for him. And what they go on and talk about is actually increasing access by teaching the child to use the program appropriately. When I first was in this program, Dr. Newton constantly told us that you need to learn the technology in order to use the technology to learn. And it's really teaching children to access technology appropriately. And that's really what the authors are impressing there, is to not give up on technology or try and alter or restrict a child's access. Actually explicitly teaching them how to use it appropriately should be tried first. If all of those ideas and all of those lessons in the explicitly taught doesn't work, then you can look at other options. But not restricting a child's access is really what the authors are looking at. And you really, once again, want to take it on a student-by-student basis, looking and evaluating how the student needs to access the technology, how it can help them achieve their goals and objectives, and then how you as the AT specialist can support the team in behaviorally supporting the child. I'm working on a case currently in a district where the child has severe ADHD and behavioral difficulties, but when he uses Clicker specifically with word banks and word prediction, it's amazing how efficient he is when he's focused. He is able to navigate seamlessly from the keyboard to the word bank to the word prediction options, not even really missing a step, and he's in second grade. Typically, I don't see that ability to navigate those 3 different supports like that. But it's only when he's focused and his attention span kind of ranges from 2 to 3 minutes, and then he sometimes gets distracted. And what the team and I are working on is really explicitly teaching him how to interact with the computer program and how to make sure that he stays behaviorally on track. So incorporating his computer skills and his computer behavior into his behavior plan so that he's getting positive reinforcement as he appropriately interacts with the technology. And initially, it might seem like, well, he's not appropriately accessing the computer, so he then can't use it to support his learning. And that really, you don't want to just dismiss something like that, especially with this particular child's potential. So you really want to keep this perspective in your head that, all right, how can we teach this child to appropriately access the technology so that they can exceed and meet their potential? Chapter 3 focuses on considering assistive technology in the IEP. And although Chapter 2 draws the parallel between AT and accommodations and modifications already in the student's page 8, it really is important to think of the thoughtful consideration and looking at the definition of considered. And they quote, careful and deliberate thought. And I love their anecdote that they provide about picking out a card for your mom's birthday. And that's exactly what we do. We pick up a card, we look at it, and we think, oh, that doesn't really right fit. And that's exactly what we should do when we are looking at assistive technology. There's another quote on page 30 that they end the first paragraph, and they say, assistive technology devices and services focus on providing access to any item for any student for any goal. And helping you really keep that phrase in your head can help you to make sure that you consider assistive technology for any student to accomplish any goal. The authors also provide a checklist approach where you actually give the IEP team a checklist of various technologies available in the school that may or may not be included in the student's IEP. This approach can be very helpful for teams, especially for teams who feel like their knowledge isn't really up to par, knowing what actually exists and what can support the student's IEP progress. But this does lead directly into the next bullet point on the slide, which is use versus need. The problem with the checklist is that the team might be thinking about what might be helpful for the student, not what is required for the student to have a free and appropriate education and make progress on their IEP goals and objectives. So that's the one danger of providing this list to the team, and I want you to think about this carefully when you create your guide for your school about AT consideration. How much should you put on this list or this flow chart, and what should we leave off? Because what also might happen is that the team might feel restricted by this list, and that only ideas on this list are proposed rather than some other more creative ideas. So there are pros and cons to providing this list. It just depends on the actual need of your school. So focusing more on use versus need. They give an example of a boy using a slant board and whether or not he needs it in order to make progress or if he just uses it and it's helpful to him. And that's something that's extremely important when we're thinking about assistive technology. Does the child actually need it to make progress? The last important point in Chapter 3 that I want to go over is looking at AT written into goals. A lot of times you'll find teams that tend to either want to write goals and objectives that have to do with assistive technology or incorporate assistive technology into goals and objectives. And I think their example about adding in extra supports in general on page 37, they say, using paper and pencil, Ellen will write a 5-sentence paragraph. we would never think to use something like that. And that's what assistive technology really should be considered. It is just the means at which the child is accomplishing the goals and objectives. So it's not really necessary to always write it in the actual goal and objective. Now, it's a request in the team and it's a discussion at the PPT that it's required, then it really doesn't do harm. But where the harm really can be is if a goal and objective is created specifically for the use of assistive technology. The purpose of AT is to support a goal and objective and to help a child master that objective. The AT should not drive the goal and objective. And sometimes I find that teams need help clarifying this idea. Another really important aspect is knowing that on page 8, when assistive technology is being written, writing in the actual technology support rather than the brand name. So, for example, thinking about tissues and Kleenex. We tend to say, can you hand me a Kleenex, even though that's the brand name. We're really asking for a tissue. So we wouldn't want to write WordQ on page 8, because what if WordQ goes out of business? If we're not using WordQ, then we're essentially out of compliance on our IEP. Instead, what we would write on page 8 is audio-supported word prediction or talking word processor. Something that is more general, and then the team picks which product to buy. Because even in an assistive technology evaluation, I might find the support that the child needs, but the team might decide to buy a different product than the one that I actually used in the evaluation, which is totally fine as long as the child is receiving the supports. Writing those supports in more general terms also gives the team some leeway to use high-tech or low-tech. For example, the child is provided with word banks, so they could be provided with just word banks on a piece of paper or word banks on the actual computer. What also is a very important point that this chapter talks about is looking at assistive technology services. And the purpose for AT services is to provide enough training and support for the team to effectively implement the assistive technology. The idea is that we are not on the hours grid because we are not providing direct service to the child towards IEP goal and objectives. The services is really for the team and maybe to train the child on the technology initially, but it's not a continued related service. And that's an important thing to really highlight to teams and to make sure that that distinction is made clear. Because a lot of times teams get a little bit confused about AT services, and it's really to empower the team to feel confident and to implement assistive technology as necessary, and also to adjust the plan as necessary as maybe the child is asked to do different tasks, move on to different grades, or transition to a different setting. I included this cartoon because I think it really touches on their conversation about UDL and having a healthy diet, differentiating instruction with assistive technology. Because really the best assistive technology is the technology that's already available, that the child is using typically in their classroom with maybe just different settings or different accessibility features. So I think that this cartoon really plays to that concept, is that the best thing to do is really providing the technology for everyone and making sure that the child with disabilities can access it and access the curriculum in general. The chapter ends with highlighting that the least restrictive solution for assistive technology is the most preferred. The figure on page 43 I really love because it kind of looks at the zone of proximity to the child. The closer the technology is to their environment, the easier it will be to implement into their daily routine, and the more likely that it will actually be effectively implemented and put into their daily routine. I try and highlight something similar to this model when teams or parents request dictation software, speech to text. Because in this little bubble, you can see that the child would essentially have to go to another room in the building, which is the outer circle, away from their classroom and their desk and their little cluster in order to complete the task. If I can find something that was less restrictive for that child to use in the classroom and in more tasks in their home environment, I would much rather try that. And maybe suggest dictation and practicing that for homework where there's typically a quieter environment and that a child will usually be doing work by themselves or with an adult support. So really thinking about how the assistive technology restricts that child, because the more restrictions there are, the less likely that it will be effectively and routinely implemented. This slide is the AT consideration chart that's included in our new Connecticut AT guidelines. And there's a hyperlink on this slide for you, and these are the references. It was adapted from Joy Zabala and Gail Bowser, the two gurus in the field. But what this really does is it really provides the team with a flow chart or a decision-making chart. And this is something similar that I want you to provide for your teams. Really asking those questions. And it might be more specific than this. You might want to use some simpler terms. You do not have to use a visual flow chart like this. You can really use a check sheet, anything you would like that you feel like your school might be helpful. As mentioned previously, we talked about maybe providing technology that is available in the school, and that might be something that you include on your chart. You know, is it a writing problem? And then list what's actually available. Maybe the built-in accommodation accessibility features in Microsoft Word or in Windows 7 or Mac, whatever you have at your schools. Some reading ideas like Bookshare if the child has a print disability. So really trying to make this a one-stop deal based on your team to help support them during the AT consideration process at essentially every PPT. Although it's not done in practice, that's in theory what should be happening. So just start drafting this, and it starts asking the right questions about your PPT team. Like, if you give them actual tools, will then more children have assistive technology that maybe don't need it? And really kind of should this be backed up with some professional development on actually considering assistive technology? What I want you to jot down in your blog is, if you think your team had either a flow chart like this or a list of available technology in your school, do you think students who use assistive technology would be increased, or do you think there would be more evaluations? And do you think maybe it would be increased in a way that was not necessary? So would people just be checking the box, kind of like CMT accommodations sometimes, where you just check the box to give them as much as they can, but it's not always what they need? So just kind of reflect a little bit about how this might change your school and assistive technology at your school. So that's the conclusion of our first online lecture. Please feel free if you have any questions as we were going along, if you have any concerns, if you want to add any comments, please feel free to write that in your blog. I'll be following up with you afterwards on that. And if you have any specific questions about your AT consideration activity, please feel free to email me or to write it in your blog. I'll be checking both. The lauren.mccary@gmail.com is the quickest way to get a hold of me, but I do check my Southern email at least once a day. And I hope everyone has a great week, and I look forward to reading your blogs.